Hello, everybody. Here we are again, and we're back again after a little pause from the Bible studies. So I hope you enjoyed the former studies that we just did about Egypt and the Hebrews leaving on Egypt. So we just closed that off a couple of weeks ago or last week with 9 lessons, nine Bible studies about the Hebrews leaving Egypt. So now we're going to start on a new series, I think. We'll just see how that goes. And I'm pretty excited about this one because what we're going to be talking about is the bread of life. Jesus said in one of the Gospels, I am the bread of life. So that's just like a really small sentence and a small saying of Jesus, but I think there's very much spiritual truth and very much we can learn about this. So I think it was last week or so in church during the time of worship. This saying of Jesus, I was just thinking about, okay, I'm going to do a next Bible study. What are we going to think about? Which part of the Bible, which story? And kind of this saying of Jesus came into my mind. And I thought about it for a while, and it just, really sank down into my soul, into my spirit. And I thought, oh, this is really something. Here are some pretty good and spiritual, strong truths hidden in here. Pretty good treasure. So I thought about some more, and now we're going to get into it and look into it some more about the saying of Jesus. And just one side note: I make my own bread, or I make our own bread for the family here at home. So I get the ingredients together, I put them in the bread machine, and the bread machine does everything, the kneading, the rising, and the baking, or whatever. In the morning, we just have wonderful baked bread. So I've been doing that for quite some years, and it just kind of hit me that there's so much spiritual truths in bread and spiritual meaning about bread. And I was just making bread for a long time, and it's just like underneath my hands. I didn't really realize it that much until I thought some more about that. So that's really kind of nice. Where do we find this subject, or the saying of Jesus? Now, it's in John 6, the Gospel of John, chapter 6. And in that chapter, we read the context where Jesus said, I am the bread of life. So today, we're not going to read the whole chapter because it's quite long. So if you'd like to, you can read John 6 for yourself to read in detail what exactly the context is wherein Jesus is saying, I am the bread of life. But I'm gonna talk about some more about the context in the main lines. Jesus also said some more things about himself. This one is, I'm the bread of life, but he also said, I'm the good shepherd. Jesus also said, I'm the true vine. I am the door. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. So he's referring to things in daily life and teaching us something about that, more about his character, who he is, and who he can be and will be for us. So let's get into the story and talk a little bit more of the context and what things are happening around at the time of Jesus, wherein he said, I to the people, I am bread of life. So in John 6, verse 4, there's a very interesting verse, and it's a small verse. And maybe you've read it sometimes, and I read across it and just didn't really notice it. But in John 6, verse 4, it says, the Passover was nearby. The feast of the Jews, the Passover was nearby. And then the verses go on to say, he asked Philip, where are we going to buy a lot of bread so these people can eat? So Jesus is connecting the Passover to feeding the people with bread. And he asked Philip, where are we going to buy bread that these people may eat? And right away, so I had to think about, of course, the unleavened bread in Egypt and the Passover in Egypt, where it was instituted by God. So apparently, the Passover was also held in the time of Jesus, and the time of Passover was nearby. And Jesus knew that, of course, and he right away thought, okay, where are we going to feed these people with bread? So that's really an interesting thing. So this also tells us that Jesus has care for physical needs, our physical needs, and the physical needs of the people around him. And so the story goes on, and Jesus fed like the 5,000 people there with 5 loaves and 2 small fishes. So we all know that story. So that's how it kind of started. The Passover was nearby. There was bread in the multitude, and Jesus multiplied it to a great abundance to feed 5,000 people. Also, many spiritual lessons in that story that we're going to pass on. After that miracle, Jesus leaves that place with his disciples, goes across the lake, and the next day the people, they looked for Jesus, and they came looking for him, and they didn't find him. Eventually they did find him. And why did the people look for him? And Jesus said that to them and told them it's not because of the signs they saw, the spiritual signs, but because they were fed and they were filled with the loaves of bread. So all these people who were there, they were focused on their physical needs. That's what Jesus addresses in these people. You're not looking for me because of the signs you saw, but because you were fed. And in verse 27 of John 6, Jesus says, so he takes us a step ahead, a step deeper. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you. And another place, Jesus says, if you drink the water I will give you, you will never thirst again. So this is kind of the same principle. Jesus says, if do not labor for the food which perishes, but the food that will endure for everlasting life, or the water I will give you, you will never thirst again. So today, in these time and age, a lot of people are busy filling their physical needs, hungry, filling their bodies, their stomachs with food. That's what most of their life is about. And all these people are kind of looking for a Jesus to help them fill their physical needs and their earthly longings. Quite often our body and our soul have the lead in our lives. They ask for our attention in all kinds of ways. But Jesus wants to fill our spirit. That's one of the first lessons we can learn from here. There's also an interesting fact in the whole way Jesus is addressing these things, and it's more of a Jewish way of communication. It's not really to the point that Jesus says, okay, this is my point I want to make, and this is a bomb. That's kind of the Dutch way. People we here in Holland, we say things, we're like really to the point, quite to the point that some people say it's kind of rude. But the Jewish way is more talking about it, asking questions, going around it a bit slowly and slowly, making his point and his teaching clearer and clearer. And we also learn that because Jesus taught a lot of times in parables, and he used examples. There was also always kind of a hidden message in there. Disciples often had to ask afterwards, tell us about the parable, explain to us what you really meant about it. So what Jesus is trying to do is get the other party, the other person that he's talking to understand what he was trying to say. And also in John 6, we also see that Jesus is narrowing down his message. It's focusing more and more to what he's really wanting to say. So what we see here is a difference between the physical and the spiritual food. So Jesus is talking more and more about the spiritual food that he wants to give. And the people who are listening to him, the Jews, and all the people who were fed, they were just thinking more and more about physical bread and the bread of this earth. So you see in the chapter that's quite of a difference that's taking place. And I'm going to read a few verses from 28 till about 35. So how the story goes on, that's a bit clearer if I just read a couple of verses. And then they said to him, what shall we do that we may work the work of God, the works of God? So now they're kind of getting the feeling that these things are about spiritual things. And Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him who sent him." Therefore they said to him, "What sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." And so here you see, they're still on that physical track, still thinking about physical bread. Then Jesus said to them, "Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." So Jesus is making it more and more clear that he's not talking about physical bread, but he's talking about spiritual bread. He's talking about himself, who is coming down from heaven and who wants to give his life and gives us life. And then in verse 34 it says, "Then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always." And there you see again, they're still on that physical track, still thinking about physical bread. And Jesus tries to get clearer and clearer. In verse 35 he says, Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life." So this is the thing we're talking about. And he's getting clearer and clearer, and he says, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." So now he's made his point pretty clear. I am the bread of life. And still he's using the physical bread as an example for himself. And now I think his point is pretty clear. But still, the Jews don't really understand that. The people who are listening didn't really grasp that at all. Because further on in the chapter, quite a few people left him because they thought his teaching was hard and they just couldn't grasp it. So they were still focused on that physical bread because they were thinking, our fathers ate manna in the wilderness. Oh, and that's the bread from heaven. So Jesus is talking about manna again, but he was talking about himself. So what we see in this whole teaching, that Jesus says, "I'm the bread of life," that he's using the example of bread to teach them a spiritual principle. And I also believe that today Jesus wants to teach us quite a few things using the example of bread. So why did Jesus really use that example of bread? So in the first place, it was something that they knew and they could relate to that. So I think in that time and age, quite a few people ate bread as a common thing to eat, just like nowadays. A lot of people eat bread. But also they just had saw a miracle that Jesus had done with bread, because he had just fed the 5,000 people with bread. So it was really fresh in their memory, the miracle about bread. So he used that freshness in their memory to bring them to another level and teach them some more about that. And through this, he is shifting their focus from the earthly things to the more heavenly and the more spiritual things. On the one side, earthly things are important because in the Lord's Prayer, we pray, and Jesus taught us to pray, first, give us this day our daily bread. And then after that, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. So first, that first part of that center part of the prayer, we ask for our earthly things and then the spiritual things. So why did Jesus do that? And why is that important? Because I think if our earthly needs are filled, and we have a full stomach, then we have more focus and can have more attention for the spiritual things. Maybe you don't know this, but William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, about 150 years ago in the poorest part, in the darkest age of London, he went and preached the gospel to all the outcasts in London. And he noticed that those outcasts and the people on the streets, they did not have any ears for the gospel because they had empty stomach. So what he did, he fed those people, gave them food to eat, got them into shelters, and at the same time he preached the gospel. And then he noticed that the gospel would land more by the people if their physical needs were were filled. And that's exactly what Jesus would do. I think there's a good example of what Jesus would do. He would first, take care of our physical needs and then fill our spiritual needs. But on the other hand, paying attention to those physical needs must not get the overhand. That we cannot be busy too much with that. Maybe a little sidestep here. Maybe some people fast for some days or fast for a few weeks. It's taking no food. You can fast in all different kind of ways. Usually people drink water or juice on the side. And why do people do that? I did myself once a few years ago. And in doing that, you say to your physical needs, to your body, who's always actually screaming for attention, screaming for, I want food, I'm hungry, pay attention to me, give me something. Then you say to your body, not now, I'm going to subject you to my spirit. And I did that for about 9 days. And the first couple of days were really, really difficult because you really get hungry and stuff like that. But after that, you notice that the calling of your body, for physical needs becomes quieter and quieter, and then your spirit kind of takes over, and spiritually you're very sharper to the things that are happening around you. So that's really important and really really good to fast once in a while. So once again, why did Jesus use the example of bread? On the one hand, of course, it was a daily thing that people could relate to. But on the other hand, I think there are very many aspects in bread itself, in the baking of bread and the ingredients of bread that relate to Jesus. And I think there are very many spiritual treasures hidden in here. So if we look shortly at the ingredients, then a lot of things can go into bread, but there's some kind of basic ingredients. That's water and salt and some kind of fat. So in my bread, I usually put olive oil, but you can also put butter in, flour, and yeast, or the biblical word is leaven. So something to make it grow and make it bigger. So those are the basic ingredients that are in bread. And of course, you can add all kinds of stuff to make all kinds of different bread. But this is kind of the basic thing here. If you look at a supermarket nowadays and you look at the bread section, you see like many different kinds of breads: white bread, brown bread, raisin bread, sugar bread, whatever. All kinds of things. So maybe we have made quite a mess out of bread, if you know what I mean. And maybe it's like that in the spiritual way, but also in a religious way. We have so many different kind of churches, so many different people bringing the gospel in all kinds of different ways, and it's gone far away from the real core of the gospel, the real core of bread. Just these 5 things: water, salt, oil, flour, yeast or leaven. And all these ingredients, they also can be found in the Bible. Jesus refers to them in one way or another. Just like you are the salt of the earth kind of thing. And water comes quite often in the Bible, and so on and so on. So I think all these ingredients have a deeper meaning, a hidden treasure in them. So that's about the ingredients. And beside that, we also have the process of baking bread. So you put all the ingredients together, have to be done in a certain way. And then actually there are 3 things that happen that you have to do to get bread. The first, you have to knead all the ingredients together, and that has a certain meaning to it. You don't just do that for the fun of it, but that has it has a certain purpose. Then you have to let the bread sit down and rise, give it some time. And then there's the baking process where heat comes in to bake the bread off. So there's 3 main stages of baking bread. So also in these stages, process of breaking bread, I also think there are very many spiritual things hidden in here. So as you can imagine, a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to go through. Too much, I think, for one study. So I think we're going to break it down into different studies, and we'll see along the way how many that will be. So for me, it's not really that clear yet. So I will just see how that goes. So like I said, next time we're going to look more into these aspects of the bread, the ingredients and the process, and see what we can learn about that. When Jesus says in the gospel to the people around him, but also is saying to us today, I am the bread of life. So that's it for today. So this is kind of more of an introduction, I guess, to the bread of life. And next time we'll get more into it. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time. And I hope you have a good week. And yeah, see you next time. Bye-bye.